Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this policy briefing on making tax time work for everyone in 2020. My name is DEVIN. I'm the Deputy Director of Tax Credits for Workers and Their Families, or TCWF. We're a nonpartisan communications initiative that works with policymakers and advocates to improve tax credits for low-wage workers at the state and federal levels. Each year, the refundable tax credits like the Earned Income Tax Credit and the Child Tax Credit boost income from millions of working Americans. They are among the most effective anti-poverty tools our tax code has to offer, lifting nearly 9 million people, including 5 million children, out of poverty and improving financial stability for millions more. Because of these credits, tax season is a critical time for low-wage workers to build a financial cushion for the upcoming year. However, due to complex eligibility requirements and other barriers, there is still work to be done to ensure that everyone who is eligible for the EITC and CTC is able to claim the credit they've earned. Today, we'll dive into some of the existing opportunities to strengthen the tax moment for low-income Americans. You'll hear from a range of speakers on ways to build upon 2019 victories, 2020 proposals, new research, and more. In the folders provided for you today, you'll find speaker bios and resources from our panelists. We also encourage you to join us in live tweeting this event using the hashtag #TaxTimeForEveryone. So I'm thrilled to now introduce our first speaker to kick off today's event. Gary Cunningham is the president and CEO of Prosperity Now. Prosperity Now's mission is to ensure that everyone in our country has a clear path to financial stability, wealth, and prosperity. Prior to coming to Prosperity Now, Mr. Cunningham served as the president and CEO of the Metropolitan Economic Development Association and in leadership roles at the Northwest Area Foundation and North Point Health and Wellness Center. We are excited to have Mr. Cunningham here today to offer introductory remarks and kick off today's event. Please join me in welcoming Gary Cunningham. Thank you.
So let's give it up for Devin. She did a fantastic job. I was so impressed with, this issue of projecting, speaking. This is something that we all don't do naturally. And so I just want to say that I am so pleased that we have young people in our community that are coming up and actually leading the charge. So thank you again. Let's give it up for Devin. So before I start today, I just wanted to thank all of you for coming here today to sharing this important moment with us that is so critical for the vitality and the prosperity of all of our communities in this country. And I particularly want to thank the hardworking and dedicated staff at Prosperity Now. Could all the staff members of Prosperity Now please stand up and take at least one short bow? Please stand up. Please stand up. They are a great group of people that are doing great work. I also want to thank my board member, Ellen Lazar, who's in the back. Would you please stand up, Ellen? Ellen is fantastic, does wonderful work in leading the organization from the board. I'm Gary Cunningham, as Devin has said. And before I start, I really want to say here today that this issue of EITC is very close to me, in part because when I was younger, my family took advantage of this opportunity, and it really put us on a road to financial health and stability. So it's not just something that's abstract in the life that I've lived and how I got here today. I also want to thank our co-sponsors of this event, Tax Credit for Workers and Their Families, who Devin is with. Could we give it up for them? Now, I got to work with this crowd because, you guys aren't really applauding that hard. So, we got to get into the spirit of this moment. We're here to celebrate something. And then I just want to give it up to H&R Block for their continued support for this critical event each year. Can we say, yes, H&R Block? All right. So, I came here in part because one of my staff asked me to, but the other part of it is, because this is an opportunity not only for us to celebrate, but to move an agenda right? So we're here not just to celebrate, but we're also here to learn together and to do something different around this work. And I can tell you that Senator Brown and his staff that have been working on this issue, he could not be here today because, I think some of you know that the Senate was in session late. And so I just want to say we're very grateful for his continued work and policy on these issues. And let's just give him a round of applause for all the work he's done. I also want to thank our wonderful panelists that are here today. So I want to thank them in advance. Their knowledge, their expertise, to take time out of their busy schedules to be here and to share with us how we can make the tax code work better for everyone. Give it up for the panelists. And, finally, thank you to our keynote speakers for their time, their energy, for being here today to say a few words this morning. Now, I want to say at Prosperity Now, we actually deeply believe that everyone deserves a chance to prosper. In fact, for more than 40 years, through a combination of scalable practical solutions, in-depth research, and proven policy solutions, we have worked to make it possible for millions of people, especially people of color, and those of limited incomes, to achieve financial security, stability, and ultimately prosperity. I was just talking to the commissioner, who I'm going to introduce in a moment, and we were talking about this country. And we were talking about the fact that, I've been all over the world. And this country actually has done some great things for me and my family, for his family, and for all of us in this room. But we're not good enough until every American can fully participate in the financial systems and structures that we have created that really create prosperity in this country. And over the last 4 decades, we've learned at Prosperity Now a lot about the challenges facing working families as they work to achieve economic mobility and long-term economic security. At the same time, we've also learned about what can be done to make the path towards prosperity a little easier. As many of in this room, many of you know, the single greatest level we have to boost economic lives in this country is through our country's tax code. To help illustrate the importance of the tax time and how we can make it work better for everyone, I want to share a brief story from my hometown of Minneapolis about Melissa, a mother of 3, who until recently was a waitress. For the past 10 years, Melissa had been filing her taxes for free with her local volunteer income tax assistance VITA program, which has been organized by our partners at Prepare and Prosper. In addition to helping Melissa avoid extremely high fees for filing taxes, VITA programs also have been critical toward ensuring that she has full access to any benefits she earns, such as the Earned Income Tax Credit, known as the EITC. As trusted and competent tax preparers, hardworking VITA volunteers have not only achieved a 98% accuracy rate. Can I give it up for the 98%? That's a big deal. These volunteers also leverage the tax time moment to put money into the hands of hard-working Americans. In fact, thanks to our Tax Opportunity Network, which is over 5,000 members strong, and the VITA sites across the country, the VITA program under this leadership has returned over $1 $1.8 billion in refunds last year. Give it up for $1.8 billion. And, you know, this money actually changes people's lives. This isn't just not like we're talking about just money coming in one door and going out the other. This is really changing and transforming lives. Our taxpayer Opportunity Network also advocates for the VITA Permanence Act, which was passed into law last year and increased funding for VITA, going from $12 million 5 years ago to $25 million in 2020. Isn't that incredible? Give it up for the... Now, I know you guys are getting tired of clapping, but I'm not tired of talking. So, what is this all about? It's about Melissa. For Melissa, the VITA program has not only helped her receive the maximum amount of tax refund she's earned, it has also given the financial cushion that she needs to catch up on her finances, to pay for her children's school expenses, and to achieve financial security. And that isn't just it. It's actually allowed her to fully participate in our democracy. And isn't that why we're all here today? Isn't that what this is all about? And a big reason for this is because the EITC, which for decades has been the most powerful and effective anti-poverty tool in our country. And in fact, according to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, in 2018, the EITC lifted 5.6 million people, including 3 million children, out of poverty. This is because as a fully refundable tax credit, the EITC rewards work and puts money back in the hands of hardworking taxpayers. For low and moderate income families like Melissa's, the EITC often represents the largest lump sum cash payment that their household will receive in that year. Now, as powerful as the VITA program is, the EITC and other tax credits for workers have been to help low-income and moderate-income families not only get out, but get ahead. Much work remains to be done, particularly at tax time. And though the tax code really helps us get there, the path to prosperity has to be helping working families prosper, using the tax code to do that. This includes passing Senator Brown's Working Families Tax Relief Act, which would expand the EITC to those under the age of 24 and over the age of 66, as well as increasing support to those households without dependent children in the home. We also have to make it easier. Oh, we got a little clap there. We got one person that liked that. We also have to make it easier for families to save at tax time. They have the savings, they need the savings to fall back on throughout the year. This is what the bipartisan Refund the Rainy Day Savings Act would do. Allow tax filers to defer 20% of their tax refund for 6 months. And finally, we have to continue building on two critical VITA victories we secured this last year. Number one, the passage of the VITA Permanence Act, and number two, we were able to increase the VITA funding by 40%. Did you hear me? Did everybody aware of that? 40%. But we're not done yet. We must ensure that VITA's field has the resources they need to deliver high-quality tax preparation services for low and moderate income families. So you guys are all waiting for this moment. To close, I'd like to leave you with some remarks that Melissa made recently with our partners at Prepare and Prosper. Quote, "When I see investment, I see my children. I have to invest in my future and my children are my future, unquote. As we listen to the keynote speakers today and our panelists, let's think about the ways we can work together to make great investments in Melissa's families and the countless other families like hers throughout the country and during the tax time moment. Now, that was my introduction. Now I've got another 3-hour speech. No. In a few minutes, we're going to hear from the fantastic panel of experts that have been put together who will highlight what's going on in the tax time space. But first, I want to honor all of you with the presence of our IRS Commissioner, Mr. Chuck Riddick. And I'm going to give Chuck a little introduction. Short, very short. Chuck Riddick is the 49th Commissioner of the IRS, presiding over the nation's tax system, which collects approximately $3.4 trillion in tax revenue each year. In leading the IRS, the Commissioner is focused on improving services to the nation's taxpayers, balancing appropriate enforcement of the nation's tax laws while respecting taxpayers' rights. We are honored to have him out as our public servant. Please give it up for Commissioner Riddick.
I'm going to help put some things into perspective. I know all of you think very highly of the Internal Revenue Service, and that's important to us. Last year we gave out, and I'm going to qualify these terms as I speak, but last year the IRS issued $61 billion in EITC refundable credits to 25 million taxpayers. It is not something that somebody takes advantage of. It's something that people in this country are entitled to, and to receive it, they must file an income tax return. If the income tax return is not filed, and if the income tax return does not claim it, we don't have the statutory authority to issue it. It's in the statute. We have the funding. We need to issue this money, and it sounds kind of funny to be, going out and saying people need to file returns, claim it, and a married couple under $56,000 entitled to it who are eligible can get up to $6,557 refundable credit, really whether or not they owe the tax. So the trigger for this is filing the return. The challenge for this is filing the return. A challenge that we have in the country and that we have at the Internal Revenue Service is we have tens of millions of people that either do not file returns, or they are underrepresented, unrepresented, or not comfortable in the English language. For what I just said, I'm now going to help, I think, put some of that into perspective, which is my father came to this country from what became East Germany. He went to high school in this country, and he enlisted in the Navy the day he got out of high school. Grew up in Los Angeles. I grew up in Los Angeles. He had a very distinct German name, first name Hans and last name Rettig, and grew up in Los Angeles during the height of World War II, went into World War II, and raised me and my older brother with, when you have the opportunity to give back to this country, you give back to this country. This is the greatest country on the planet. And we grew up with relatives who were in East Germany who did not make it out. And that's an eye-opener, right? So there is a privilege to being in this country. It's not perfect, but it is great. And one of the things a great country does is give back to its own people and try to help its own people. To further put in perspective why I'm passionate about coming out, and last week I was up in Baltimore for the cash campaign on same thing, EITC, and then I spent about almost 3 hours at the MC Vet, which is a homeless shelter for veterans, in place for veterans. For those of you who are out there and you have programs and you're involved with organizations like this, call us. I will come and explain the importance of people in the country. We're getting the Internal Revenue Service away from institution, brick and mortar, to having people understand that we are an organization run by people who care, and we care deeply about the underserved, unserved, and non-English speaking communities. I am the first commissioner, very proud to have a son or daughter active duty United States military. My son is currently a medical officer in the military. He's career, and he has deployed twice. Some of my life experiences obviously come from my son being in a deployed situation, and it causes you even more to round up your family. And in this context, our family is every American. Round up your family and realize the importance of helping people when historically they have not had the help, whether through their own efforts or lack of us coming forward with efforts, whether it's the Internal Revenue Service or a variety of organizations. I'm also the first commissioner to go to the Pentagon and argue for resources being spent by the Pentagon on military VITA. I am a huge advocate of VITA, military VITA, tax counseling for the elderly, anything we can do to give back. And if you're in this room and you're in these seats, you can give back more of your time, your effort, your thoughts. You know, you can send an email to an organization and say, hey, I was thinking about this. You can send emails to us. We currently have in flight implementation of the Taxpayer First Act. There is a email address, tfao@irs.gov. People can give us any comment they want on how we can do things better, focused on service and enforcement. I don't use the word service because as the IRS, we're actually also in flight on modernizing our systems. And I will tell you, we can modernize our systems over a 6-year plan that we have out there. But if we don't get into the non-English speaking language, we're not providing services to tens of millions of people who are very proud to be here. I am also the first commissioner whose spouse came to this country as a refugee. My wife was born and raised in Saigon. My wife was in the U.S. Embassy when the helicopters were removing people, taking them out to the aircraft carriers. And there's a documentary out there, and if you haven't seen it and you only lived in the United States and you never went to another country, I would encourage you to see it. 411 people were left behind in U.S. Embassy grounds. The North Vietnamese took over April 30, 1975. She was 11 years old. North Vietnamese took over the Saigon and South Vietnam. She was on the embassy grounds. She was on the embassy grounds when the tanks from North Vietnam came through, crashing through the front gates of the embassy. These are things people of my generation, young like myself, vividly remember. I grew up in the Vietnam era. I went to more funerals in junior high and high school than probably any junior high or high school person should. My wife was there. 3 weeks later, they took her father away. He did 3 years, 9 months in a re-education camp where over half the people never made it out of the camp. And he lost an eye, he lost his teeth, and he got disabled in the camp. If you want to know where the vision is of the Internal Revenue Service Commissioner, I just told you. Underserved communities. People who come to this country from another country, my in-laws, my wife, her entire family, they all came in ones and twos. On the 5-year mark, they became U.S. citizens. Annually, they have the ability to demonstrate that they are as much a part of this country as those of us who had the privilege of being born in this country, and it is a privilege to be born in this country. We need to help people by getting, we, the IRS, the software companies and others who assist, and the software companies who assist the VITA programs, the TCE programs, getting into other languages. When I came on board, the Internal Revenue Service did things in 6 languages. Personally, being from Los Angeles, I find that somewhat disrespectful to the people that we are trying to help. It's my understanding that 2 of the large software companies next year, one was only in 1 language and I'm unsure of the other, but it's my understanding that 2 of the large software companies next year, one will be in 16 languages, one will be in 22. It came back to me with one person can make a difference, and I've been pounding that drum since I came on board. It's not limited to people who are not comfortable in the English language. It's limited to every American. As the Internal Revenue Service, we are responsible for every person. The EITC delivers. It delivers a change in life initially and over a longer period of time. And giving people who are down and out, giving them a check, it takes more than just a check to get somebody from no longer being down and out. So organizations such as this, you know, the idea of how people financially manage their funds that they do get. We give somebody, I don't like the term give. IRS issues a check to somebody who's entitled to receive that check, right? EITC. What they do with it can change their lives, or a lot of people don't have the internal wherewithal to know, I just got $6,557. Now what, right? What do I do with it? And a lot of people in this country have never opened bank accounts, et cetera, et cetera. It's much more than EITC. EITC is the beginning of changing lives. Do we monitor the EITC program? Yes, we monitor the EITC program. It's one of the responsibilities we have. We issue letters to individuals on whether or not they're entitled. Many of these letters ask questions like, if you're self-employed, can you verify that you have a business, whether it's through a business card, a business license, or something. It's not asking them for their income. When we issue these letters, over 20% never respond to us. Remember that a large population of EITC folks who did file a return, who made a claim, a large percentage of that population are likely transient or don't want to interact with the Internal Revenue Service. So those of you who are in VITA and other similar organizations, it's not, and I'm putting it on myself as well, just preparing a return and making the claim. Stay in touch with the people, encourage the people to stay in touch. These are funds that they are entitled to. They live in this country. The statute is very clear. They are entitled to this money, and we want to issue the money to the folks who are entitled. It's their money, right? It doesn't belong to the United States at that point. Another concern we have is approximately 20% of the people who are eligible do not file and claim for it. They either don't file a return or they file a return and don't claim the EITC. That just shouldn't happen, right? None of us would, so to speak, leave money on the shelf. And we certainly wouldn't if we were in a situation where we're wondering, can we pay rent? It's 3 months behind. Can we, how do we get from point A to point B to go do a job interview? I need a shirt with a collar to go do a job interview and I have no money. And they leave money in this context there. That should not happen in the greatest country on the planet. And so those of us, your responsibility for living in this country is to watch out for others. We were taught by my dad, I am the only person in my family to graduate from college. The reason for, you might want to guess, I'm number 3 of 3 children. Neither of my parents or my brother or sister graduated from college. It was important to my mother that one of us graduate from college. Had I been number 2, I would probably be doing something different. But out of love and respect for my mother, I went to college, right? And then law school and graduate law school and the rest of that. Am I passionate about this? Yes. Is the IRS passionate about this? Yes. Since I've come on board about 15 months ago, every employee of the Internal Revenue Service, I look at as first an IRS ambassador, the opportunity to explain to people who we are, not brick and mortar, not where we have an office, not an online presence, but who we are as people. We are reflective of the communities that we serve. I have also been stressing very much so in terms of equity, diversity, and inclusion, the importance of that. The fact that we come into a room, the fact that we come into a country through different doors and have different experiences makes us stronger. If every person in the Internal Revenue Service, and this is what I talk about internally, grew up with me, shared a room with me, had the same parents, went to the same school, had the same life experiences, we would not be in a very good place because we have me to say what those experiences are. The fact that we come into a room and into this country from different doors makes us stronger. Recently, I was in Miami and I was doing a presentation internally and I was getting into this point and I could see people say, well, that kind of sounds like rhetoric, right? I came up in that meeting with proof, and no disrespect to other countries, but I came up with proof. Asia, 4,000 or 5,000 years history. Europe, 3,000, 4,000. I'm a public school kid, so I'm probably off 1,000 years, but I'm very proud of public school and public education. That's me, that's my family, and that's who I am. So Asia, 4,000 to 5,000. Europe, 3,000 or 4,000. Where am I going next? United States, 250. We got out of the box early. We got out of the gates early. Why would you assume we got out so early? Because we're stronger together. We bring different experiences, more so than any country on the planet. We can trace backgrounds all over the place. We come into a room like this. We work together. We are stronger. I gave you the proof. Go out. Get people to file returns. The EITC is money that is sitting on the shelf. And if we gave out, I apologize for that. I don't have a better term standing up here. I have to stay in single syllables or I'll confuse all of us. We have the funding. They are entitled to the funding. The fact that 20% of the people don't claim it, it's theirs. They would not walk by cash sitting on a sidewalk, right? None of us would. That's just, it's cash on the sidewalk. This is cash on the sidewalk in the context of the Internal Revenue Service, checks that are there, and willing and desire to issue are people in the Internal Revenue Service, and I am convinced that the strength of the Internal Revenue Service is the people, want to have this be better. VITA, there are 78 high school programs in this country that do VITA. I actually participated with a few of them last year, and I wrote a letter myself to all 78. 78 sounds like a lot when I'm standing here. 78 in a country, we're in the middle of filing. We just started filing season. We're going to get 155 million returns. 78's not a big country. When I challenge people and I request that you get back into your community to help, we have a toolkit in terms of helping people develop a VITA program, and we're encouraging people to champion their local high school, whether it's the high school you went to, it's the high school in the community you live, it's a high school in the community where your brother and sister and others live. You can make a difference. One person can make a difference. This is really important because it's very grassroots. It's a very much so the Internal Revenue Service wants to be there. Our people will be there. I will be there. I made a comment, as Gary and I were talking earlier, if you need the commissioner, I go by Chuck, by the way, but if you need the commissioner somewhere to help fill seats, please ask. This is important to us. We are much more than a tax administration agency. We take tax administration seriously. We take tax enforcement seriously. Personally, I look at tax enforcement as a necessity, and it's supporting the people who wake up at 3 in the morning and wonder, did I get my return right? They need to know that we're out there looking at, with our finger on the pulse of the folks who actually don't care whether they got it right. They think they can throw a fastball by us. If you're wondering what my background was before, I'm a tax lawyer out of Los Angeles, 36 years in one job interacting with the Internal Revenue Service. And I came on board knowing 5,000 or 6,000 IRS employees out of respect for every IRS employee. And what our employees know is no person inside the Internal Revenue Service is more important than any other person, and that collectively we are the strength, I believe, of the country. The success of the country depends in significant part on the success of the Internal Revenue Service. Last year was $3.56 trillion. We know we're missing a lot. We know things are out there like virtual currency, Bitcoin, and whatnot. So we have to have our eyes in those arenas. But $3.56 trillion is about 96% of the gross revenue of this country. That can support VITA and can help people. And like I said, I was at the MC Vet homeless shelter for about 3 hours, wandering through, meeting with people and whatnot. One of my personal and professional career highlights was being with the in transition homeless vets. I have a huge appreciation for military, and that will never change. But when you're in a room of hundreds of homeless vets who are in transition trying to come back, you quickly reflect on yourself and that realize that this or that could put one of us on the street. What makes us great and us is that we care. I'm here to tell you that every person at the Internal Revenue Service cares. My attitude, I just am more vocal about it and maybe more visible because I'm privileged to carry the title commissioner. The same attitude you're seeing here, I have seen from every single employee who I've interacted with in the last 15 months. And I've done about 150 internal presentations in my time on board. And I've done about 80 external presentations where I'm challenging folks to get involved. With that, I'm closing. I don't want to overstep my timeline. Invite me back. I will be back. It's important to me that people understand what we collectively are trying to do and what we can do. And people are entitled to this earned income tax credit. It's statutory. The fact that it's kind of tied into a tax return and the Internal Revenue Service and the complexities that are just inherent in that. The most simple return is complex if you've never seen one before, right? When I got on board, one of the questions, and I said, how many things do we do? How many languages do we do things in? Well, sir, we do things in 6. I looked at that as disrespectful because when I'm in the grocery store line in Los Angeles, there's 9, 10, or 11 languages, and I'm working on English, and I'm very respectful of people who are multilingual and who come from another country. And when you're out and about and you interact with people who may have an accent, I was brought up to know one thing about that accent. It means they speak more than one language, and I am a single syllable guy in English. When I master English, I might think of those other languages. Respect each other, respect the people who need it, understand that any of us are a click away from being in a real troubled situation. We in this room are not troubled. We in this room have the ability to help our people, and your people, our people, are everyone. And in closing, I'd say one of the comments I made to Gary that I learned through my son, and I probably was not as sensitive before, is greatness gives back to people in other countries who may not want us there, who may not, may want to do everything they can. But talk to somebody who's been in the military context, guarding a food or medical convoy going through a warlord territory to a town. Neither the warlord territory or the town want us there, but we deliver food and medical supplies. We put our people at risk who are wearing the flag on their shoulder. They turn around, they go 70 kilometers back to their base, and they repeat it the next day. That's the ultimate giving in my mind. This is part of that. And I have a huge respect for this country, for this flag, and most importantly, for the people of this country, because together we are the country everybody looks to when they need something, guidance, et cetera. So thank you very much. I apologize for over speaking and appreciate it. Thank you.
Let's give it up for Commissioner Reddick. Wasn't that fantastic? Our next keynote speaker is someone I met in the 90s when he was working to put together a conference on African-American men and boys. My mentor, Joseph White, introduced me to him, and I actually participated a number of years with him on that conference. So he's been working to make a difference for a long time and has been a champion of this issue of the VITA and EITC. And he is Congressman Danny Davis from the 7th District of Illinois. And he has distinguished himself as an articulate voice for his constituents and as an effective legislator, able to move major bills to passage, such as his work on the bipartisan VITA Permanence Act. Congressman Davis is on the Committee on Ways and Means and a member of several congressional caucuses. Could you please give it up for Congressman Danny Davis?
Thank you very much. And when he mentioned black men and boys, I figured that must have been me. So I just started making my way. Let me just say that I'm delighted to be here, and I'm really pleased that the commissioner spoke a little bit longer than perhaps he had intended, because had he not, then I would not have heard his last comments. And I want to associate myself with those comments because I think they are so reflective of what America is, what America has been, and what America intends to be. So I thank all of you for being here. I thank Prosperity Now. I thank those who work with tax credits for workers and their families. And certainly we thank H&R Block and all of those who helped to organize this important discussion. I also want to thank each of you who are here because tax policy is a critical piece of improving the financial security of workers and families. Your commitment to making change and your expertise are needed and is indeed appreciated. Secondly, I want to celebrate our success last year in helping working families by the enactment of the VITA Permanence Act. I credit many of you in this room for your advocacy to make that success possible and hope that we can celebrate much such additional victories soon. We are a nation that is always becoming, trying to make perfect that union that our forefathers put together and attempted to put together many, many years ago. I have the privilege of chairing the subcommittee on worker and family support within the Committee on Ways and Means. As chair, my charge is to advance policies that help vulnerable workers and families. And there are many of those who say the Ways and Means Committee is the most important and most powerful committee in the House of Representatives, and they say that because it was the first committee established when the Constitution was written. They also say that because it deals with taxation, tax policy. There's no one who escapes tax policy in this country. Everybody is affected one way or the other. If you're not affected one way, then you are affected another way. And so I'm grateful to Chairman Richard Neal and our Democratic leadership for prioritizing improving refundable tax credits to strengthen workers and families. I applaud the chairman and my colleagues for advancing the Economic Mobility Act out of the Ways and Means Committee. Aside from the Affordable Care Act, this bill is probably the piece of legislation on which I have voted that would most directly and substantially improve the well-being of my constituents. About 1/3 of children and about 1/5 of adults in my district live in poverty. I represent what I often call the most fascinating piece of geography in North America that is put into a political subdivision. And I say that because I represent the area right next to Lake Michigan, downtown Chicago, the Magnificent Mile, Water Tower Place. Some of the wealthiest people, as a matter of fact, in this country live along there. Of course, that's not all of my district. That's only a part of my district because other parts of my district represent some of the lowest income people in North America. It's part of the areas that were burned down after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. Some of them have not been rebuilt. They represent the area that was part of the last great migration of African Americans who migrated from the rural South, trying to escape segregation, trying to escape poverty, trying to escape mistreatment. And so they migrated to many different places. And one of those places was to Chicago, Illinois, which has a long history of being and a long history of having large populations of people. Of course, we've been the third largest city in the United States of America, with over 3 million people at one point. We've lost some population, so we don't have as many people as we used to have. About 1/3, as I said, of children and 1/5 of adults in my district live in poverty. And although 1/4 of tax filers in my district are low-income working parents, only 5% can qualify for the Child and Dependent Tax Care Credit, given its extremely low phase-out rate of $15,000 a year and lack of refundability. The disparity between need and tax help is abysmal. The Economic Mobility Act changes tax policy to truly help low and moderate income families in real meaningful ways. It enhances the Earned Income Tax Credit to help non-custodial parents and childless workers. I have championed the Earned Income Tax Credit enhancements since 2005 via the Julia Carson Responsible Fatherhood and Healthy Families Act. The Earned Income Tax Credit, changed by itself, is expected to help over 500,000 workers in Illinois and increase the Earned Income Tax Credit for over 13,000 workers in my district alone. And so when people ask me, what are policies that cut across socioeconomic lines, that go below just those individuals who are termed the middle of the middle class, or those individuals who may be in better economic conditions, I always point to the Earned Income Tax Credit and what it really means for low-income families, low-income workers, and those individuals who often feel that taxation doesn't mean the same thing for them that it might mean for something else and somebody else. In addition, the Economic Mobility Act lowers the Earned Income Tax Credit eligibility to age 19. I am very proud to have led this improvement with Senator Casey from Pennsylvania since 2015 as a way to help vulnerable young workers like foster youth, homeless youth, apprentices, and job training program graduates. If the Earned Income Tax Credit for childless workers doesn't kick in to age 25, then we are ignoring tens of millions of struggling workers. One of the most vulnerable periods for many young people is really that period where you kind of reach adulthood and you've been waiting for the time when you could declare yourself grown, but you haven't had the same experiences, and maybe for the first time, you now have to figure out how to pay rent. For the first time, you now got to figure out how to pay utility bills. You never had that worry before. Or you got to figure out what your transportation scheme is. You can't go to your parents and say, look, Mom, I need whatever. Or you can't go to your father and say, I remember when I went away to college, this boy wrote his daddy a letter, said, Dear Dad, no mon, no fun. And his father wrote back and said, you know, it's bad, it's awfully sad, your dad. But you reach that point where now you're own, pretty much your own. And you've got to figure out things that you never had to really figure out before. If the Earned Income Tax Credit for childless workers doesn't kick in to age 25, then we are ignoring, as I said, tens of millions of struggling workers. I greatly appreciate the chairman's commitment to young workers. After markup, he and I agreed on additional improvements to ensure that foster and homeless youth who are working at age 18 or while putting themselves through school can also benefit from this critical expansion as well. In addition to helping childless workers, this bill makes an historic advance in reducing child poverty. The National Academy of Sciences recently released the roadmap to reducing child poverty. And that's one of the reasons that research is so important, because as we take a look at the why of things, then we have a better handle on figuring out what we might be able to do to change it, what we can actually do about it. The science is clear that a robust child and dependent care tax credit, a $2,000 child allowance via the child tax credit, and direct investment in child care subsidies will significantly reduce child poverty and greatly increase parental employment and earnings, especially for African Americans, single parents, and mothers younger than age 25. The National Academy found that child care access improvements alone could reduce child poverty by more than 1/4 over the next decade. Wouldn't that really be something? I mean, if we could do that. Thank you. Research shows that for families with children under the age of 5, receiving an extra $3,000 per year boosts children's adult earnings by 17%. When we help parents work by covering child care costs, they work and their increased earnings lift kids out of poverty. Next door to my district office happens to be a daycare center. And whenever I'm there early in the morning, I'm generally the first person there. And I see young parents who are 18, 19, 20 years old dropping their children off, and they are excited. Sometimes they're smiling, and I see them saying their goodbyes and kissing the baby goodbye before they take them into the building. I mean, it's a great feeling to know that these young people can go to work because they have a safe, secure, and well-trained group of individuals who are going to be looking after their children while they are at work, and they don't have to fear for what may be going on with them. We know how pernicious and devastating childhood poverty is. I often wonder how in the world young parents, especially young single parents, who even if they have a job, they're only making $35,000, $40,000 a year, and how they're able to provide that child or those children with equal opportunity for success. So we know that we have to keep moving. The data are clear. The policies advanced in the Economic Mobility Act that bolster refundable tax credits will do 3 things very directly: dramatically reduce child poverty, strengthen the economic well-being of families, and increase the labor force participation of millions of workers, lessening the likelihood to need government support in the future. So again, I think each and every one of you who are here, all of those who have advanced things to the point where we could be here, touting this success. And I end with one of my little favorite sayings. And it simply says that if a task is once begun, never leave till it's done. Be the labor, great or small. Do it well or not at all. Thank you so very much, and it's indeed a pleasure. I hope I didn't break the pen.
You did great. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
And now, let's give it up one more time for Congressman Danny Davis. Fantastic, fantastic champion of this work. And now I'm going to turn it over to my esteemed colleague, someone who not only believes in this work, but actually works on it overtime. David NEWVILLE is the Vice President of Policy and Research at Prosperity Now. David, please give it up for David.
Hey, invite all our panelists to come on up now and we can start the panel. Good afternoon, everyone. Big thank you to Gary and our speakers this morning for a tremendous table setting for the importance of this work, and now we can dive more into the details of this. We have an excellent panel. I will just do quick introductions and we'll just get right into it. We're going to cover a lot of terrain, hopefully in a short amount of time, from tax policy, administration, preparation, research. I think we've all heard a lot about the importance of tax time and what it means for low-income families already today. I will start introductions down the table from closest to me and on down. So starting with Mary Arthur, who's the president and CEO of the Campaign for Working Families. And then we have Chai-Ching Huang, who's the senior director for economic policy at the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities. And then Aparna Mathur, who's the resident scholar at AEI, the American Enterprise Institute. Oh, I skipped Dan. Yeah, easy to confuse them. And then Daniel Turrentine, who's the Vice President and Chief Government Affairs Officer at H&R Block. So we have a tremendous panel. We have different perspectives here from private industry, from the nonprofit side, from the policy side. Let's start out with kind of going a little deeper. We heard this from all the speakers, but particularly from Congressman Davis about why tax credits and tax time matter so much to these families, low and moderate income families. We know it's a lot of money. It makes up a big percentage of that. But let's hear everyone's perspective, both on the credits themselves, but also, as we've heard, really safe, efficient, well-done, accurate tax preparation matters too, right? And getting people, just because someone on paper has that credit coming to them doesn't mean they always get it in the way that you'd want them to do that. So general reflections from everyone who wants to jump in about, like, why does it matter? What is the impact? How does it fit in the financial lives of low and moderate income families?
Great. I can begin. That was a really inspiring morning, I think, listening to both speakers and sort of really reflecting on why tax credits matter. What does it mean for families in America? And why are we, doing this through the tax code? And I come at this from the angle of not just from tax policy research, but also from the angle of economic opportunity. My other work looks at economic mobility issues and what are families really struggling with, and how do we make sure that even within a person's lifetime, there's the opportunity to move up. But more than that, I think, looking at intergenerational transfers of mobility, what does it mean for children when parents are better off? What does it mean for families when there's enough time and financial resources for parents to invest in their children? And I think the striking finding over the last few decades of research has been the important role that tax credits can play in ensuring mobility. Most recently, we sort of, aside from other predictors of mobility, which are things like family structure and how far you are from sort of opportunity areas, it really is about financial resources and the fact that you can have access to a federal and a state EITC, other tax credit programs that can really boost financial security for families, I think has been shown to play a big role. So when I look at, I'm going to talk a little bit about the EITC and the child tax credit and the child independent care credit, which I think all came up in today's session earlier. The EITC, I think, is one of those programs that has gotten a lot of support, has bipartisan support. Most people, Republicans and Democrats, are in favor of the earned income tax credit, and I think they're coming at it from different angles. I think the most the good thing about the EITC is that it is a very targeted tax credit. It's not something that easily can be manipulated to be a cash transfer to richer or even middle income households. It's very targeted. You only get the tax credit if you're very low income. And as a result, we can actually identify and we can actually look at the impacts of the EITC on very low-income families. And we find that, as has been mentioned several times, it has a huge impact in alleviating poverty. So in 2019, I think we have about 6 million people who were lifted out of poverty as a result of the EITC. And a lot of that is also families with children and children themselves. When you combine that with the child tax credit, we're reaching an even broader set of families. So I think just from sort of a very static perspective of what does it mean that families can get $5,000 or $6,000 at the end of the tax year is very directly related to poverty alleviation. But it's not just the sort of the static impact. I think that's where the research comes in. And you actually start looking and saying, well, what is the longer term impact on families of having access to programs like the EITC and the child tax credit? And there's a bunch of research that has looked at issues like labor force participation, that has looked at issues like what happens to families and children's test scores when families have access to the EITC, what happens to infant health when families have access to the EITC. And it's amazing to me that we can, actually sort of tie in the receipt of one tax credit and look at very long-term outcomes and say that, look, families are much better off. Children achieve better test scores when families have access to the EITC. The incidence of low birth weight births is lower when you have access to the EITC. Families are doing better. Mothers' earnings are much higher in the longer run when they have access to the EITC early on in life. So, there's no denying that the EITC and in combination with the child tax credit have done a lot for low-income families over the decades. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not much more to be done, and I think that's the reason these kinds of conversations are important. We do understand the limitations of the EITC. So, there are eligibility rules about who can claim the EITC, what age do you have to be. There's a wide variation in what the credit looks like for families with children, without children. If you have 3 children, the credit looks a lot better than if you're a family with 1 child. And so, on the one hand, I think there needs to be a conversation about, well, how do we expand the EITC to families without children or to non-custodial parents? I think that's important. At the same time, I think that structure is also leading to a lot of complexity, and that shows up in what Commissioner Rettig talked about, which is people are not claiming the EITC when they're eligible for it. I was reading about this interesting experiment in California that a few economists ran, where they actually sent text messages to people who were eligible for the EITC and said, you are eligible for X dollars in refunds. All you have to do is fill out this form. And while that had a few more people signed up, it was interesting that it wasn't as if everybody jumped on board and said, look, we need to claim the EITC. This is like free cash lying around. So I think a lot more work needs to be done to understand just what is the barrier to holding people back to claiming the EITC? How can we make the rules simpler? How do we expand the credit while at the same time, move towards simplicity? When it comes to the EITC. On the child tax credit and also the child and dependent care credit, again, there's a bunch of research, as I said, that shows positive impacts for families. I think the biggest thing to me when I look at it from a tax perspective is that these are not totally refundable. So that means that if you don't owe taxes, you're not getting cash back at the end of the year. And that could be, that means that a lot of low-income taxpayers who actually don't have a tax liability are not getting as much back from the CTC and much less from the child and dependent care credit, which is absolutely not refundable. So I think we need to be moving in that direction. I think if we want the tax code to be basically serving low-income families and not just be a system of transferring resources to middle and potentially even higher income households, I think we need to target these other tax credits a lot better. We need to make sure that people who are eligible for the credits are able to claim them, that we can move towards a simpler system. Because again, it's not just the static, look what happened to poverty because we transferred $6,000. It's the longer term impacts. It's the impacts on economic opportunity and mobility that we also care about. Thanks.
Thanks, and I will underscore a lot of that. Just first, thank you to Prosperity Now and tax credits for working families. This is always one of my favourite and the most motivating and informative events that I look forward to every year. So I'm just so excited to be here. Look, we've heard that people see it. People who are working at VITA sites, people who have received the credit, folks like Melissa. People see and they have lived that it changes people's lives to be able to claim and use these tax credits for working families. And just associate myself with Pana's comments, we see it in people's lives. We also see it very strongly in the research that because it's allowing people to invest in their children and themselves, that it improves life trajectories through all of that range of different outcomes that people have. And I think it's also important to note that this is really important for advancing racial equity as well, because due to past and present discrimination and policy choices, Black and Latino workers, Native American workers are far likelier than white workers to be in low-paid occupations and therefore eligible for the credits. So while the bulk of people who receive these credits are white because of their larger size of the population, they're actually doing a good job of serving a greater proportion of households of colour and extending these sorts of trajectory-changing opportunities to their children. So that's why it's really important both to support ensuring that people who are eligible for these credits can receive them, and also strengthening the credits, particularly for some of the poorest children and workers currently locked out, including those younger workers, who are at the moment the sole group that the federal tax code taxes into or deeper into poverty. And those are things that we really should be fixing.
Hi, everyone. So I feel I'm on the ground. We run 37 VITA sites in Philadelphia, Southern New Jersey, and the surrounding communities. So I have been doing this work now for 15 years. And VITA, EITC, all of these things, it's our responsibility. Everybody in this room has a responsibility with your voice to make sure that the people that cannot be heard, those that don't have a voice, are heard. So anytime I have an opportunity, I speak, and I speak loudly and I speak firmly. We serviced 37,000 families last year. Half of them earned less than $15,000. These are families, these are individuals. And the credits, the refundable credits, the non-refundable credits, it's all so important, right? In Philadelphia, we couple that with any public benefit that a person can receive. So if you have someone coming in to tax sites, and of course, volunteer income tax assistance is basically based volunteers, right? We bring on about 80 paid people every year to manage those sites for us, right? So we go through trainings. We start in October so that our volunteers are well educated in tax law, that they can make sure that these families get those tax credits. However, the missing piece is out of the 118,000 families in Philadelphia that were serviced, 45,000 still did not file their taxes. They did not file for their EITC. So we work very close with the state, and we work very close with the city revenue department. So we get these statistics. And my goal and my passion is to see every year how many more families we can service. And I know my panel here, you guys are policy and you're this, that. I'm on the ground. So my eyes are looking at it in a different perspective. I look at the day-to-day struggles of the families. And when they're struggling and they come to us and we can say, this is what you're getting back. Now, let us try and help you stretch those dollars. Let us try and help you invest those dollars. Let us help you if you are in check systems. And anybody that has had or ever written a bad check, probably nobody in this room. Anyway, you wound up in a system that you cannot move forward. So we create other avenues. So we partner with other organizations. I have a great banking partner that opens savings accounts because it doesn't matter if you're in check systems. You can still open a savings account. So you just tie all of these things together. I'm excited that, they're going to lower the age or for someone who's eligible for these credits. My goal now is to move it into the classroom so young people can understand their own civic responsibility, but in learning their civic responsibility, they learn how to take care of their families financially. So that is kind of where my playground is, right? So, Dan?
So I'll just say, whether the credit should be expanded or kind of the tax policy side, we as a company are Switzerland on that stuff. We see ourselves as here to administer the code, not determine what the code should be. At H&R Block, we do about 20 million returns a year. We do about 13 in our 10,000 retail offices. We are in every single congressional district in the country, and we do about 8 million online. But we see more people face-to-face than the IRS every year. There's been a lot of studies that have been done about kind of where low to middle income people are financially these days. And there was a great study that the Federal Reserve did that said that 40% of Americans don't have $400 in case of an emergency. At the same time, we see that 2/3 of our clients who receive the EITC, if they don't receive that money, they're not able to meet their financial obligations that month. And so for a lot of these people, it is their largest financial transaction and most important financial transaction of the year. And consequently, getting it right matters. It matters a lot. We see that when people come into our offices. Either they're thrilled and relieved that they're getting this money. For a lot of them, they already know how they're going to spend it. It's often kind of spent in their head. They have a budget, and the moment they get it, we offer a prepaid debit card if you don't have a bank account and you load it on. So we actually have some line of sight about where that money goes, and it tends to go very fast. It isn't, spent on Nikes and TVs like you may hear. A lot of it is, dental work, because you can delay getting your tooth, repaired for a couple months. But once you get that cash, you're going to market to do things that you feel that you need to do to meet your obligations. We also know that because there is a lot of money involved, there are a lot of people who don't have good intentions in the tax preparation space. One of our great frustrations is that there are no standards to be a paid tax preparer. And so you get people who either have good intentions and aren't very competent because there's no training, or they are trained and they don't have good intentions. They fraudulently take your money. And I think one of the things we would say is that getting in the system, coming in to file your taxes early is very important, because one of the things that we're seeing now is identity theft and refund fraud. And if fraudsters tend to come in early before people have come in with their W-2s and other things, and so the earlier you come in, the more you cut down on the chance that someone's going to file your return fraudulently on your behalf. So I think we see the impact of the Earned Income Tax Credit. We see the difference that it makes in people's lives. And we think it's a program that impacts a lot of Americans.
That's great. Thank you, everybody. It's a terrific table setting for the importance here today. I want to jump to kind of like next steps. What can we do to improve this, right? Whether it's the policy side or accessing the credits. We've talked a lot about people who aren't eligible accessing it. I want to pause before we go there, though, first, looking to Mary being on the ground and Dan about what you're seeing this tax season in particular. I know it's very early, but just to briefly recap, we heard a little bit of this today, but there's been a tremendous amount of change in tax policy administration over the last couple of years, either directly or indirectly. We know the PATH Act has been in place for a number of years now, which slows down access to EITC refunds. There was a little thing called the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which created the first new major tax law in decades. There was as the commissioner mentioned, the Taxpayers First Act that just went through, which changes IRS administration. And the IRS, of course, has been starved for resources for a number of years and had to struggle there. And if that wasn't enough, last year, of course, we had the government shutdown, which, fortunately, thanks to great providers out there, we're able to recover for the most part, but obviously made things more difficult. But this year, How's it going this year so far? The last thing that I forgot to mention, which is also important, which Dan alluded to, is the return of certain types of financial products and services. The RALs and the RACs, not in the same form as they have been in the past, but you're seeing these new types of products move into the private marketplace again, with trade-offs that come with that, depending on the specific product. So that will be the last one I mentioned. I'm sure there's other I'm missing, but yeah, what are you seeing on the ground early right now before we kind of dive into how to improve this system?
Well, and for me, so far we've done about 1,700 returns. We just opened our tax sites, and people are coming in, but they're mad, and they don't understand. And they truly don't understand why their refunds have to, this whole 3-week, almost a month hold up if they're eligible for the EITC that they so desperately need and are entitled to. And it's been going on, 3 years now. And, most people, and I'm one of them, that I always say, well, if you're marrying the tax person and their Social Security to the child, however, okay, so we've gone through that. How can we make this a quicker transaction? Because as Dan said, when people come in, they're already desperate. They've already spent. They know they have to pay their rent. They have to pay their mortgage. Their electric is being cut off. So I look at that as one issue that our tax payers, they don't understand. They don't understand that I've been coming to you for all these years, and I've been claiming the same child for all these years. And we try to explain to them that the fraud that's out there, and but they're saying, well, it didn't happen to me. And, quite honestly, some people have actually gone and filed for that identity theft PIN, thinking that that's going to make the transaction faster. If that's the case, I'm just going to file even though I don't have this in my life, so maybe that's going to help me. So our taxpayers are just mad. They I know Washington's supposed to come up later, but, they heard all of everything coming out of Washington, and they really thought that it was going to be a part of their lives too, that they were going to benefit more. And now they see that they're not benefiting more. We have people that do higher exemptions just to get more money. And we can't give advice as a VITA site, but we make suggestions like, here's a W-4, maybe you want to take this back and make that correction. And they're like, no, we don't care. We need our money. So they're not going back to their employer and making that change because they want the money. And am I going to get a refund? I'll get something, and that's okay because it's taking too long for me to get it, and I need it, and I want it now. So these are some of the things that we are seeing. And we see a lot of people owing more. No correction was made. HR companies aren't on top of how I used to be in HR, so I would push the W-4, do it correctly. But HR, payroll, they're not on top of that. And people aren't going to their HR department and saying, hey, am I having enough taxes taking out, or should I make any changes? They're not doing that. So a lot of people last year were caught kind of blindsided by the fact, when they came to get their taxes done. So, I see a lot of angry people, and I keep smiling and, say we're definitely here to help, and we are going to advocate for you whenever we can. And it brings a little comfort, not a lot, when they have those bills to pay, but, that's kind of where we are.
I mean, in terms of last year and the lack of W-4 withholding changes, we certainly saw the same thing. In fact, we could kind of started to see it coming around summer and fall, that people were not changing them. That this is actually a really embarrassing fact. We saw this coming. The Government Relations Department, others, was having conversations with members of Congress and others about this. And H&R Block did a survey, and only 30% of the whatever it is, 3,000 employees at our headquarters changed their own withholdings, which is just goes to show you, like, even people in the business whose job it is, who saw this, were like, boy, this is a problem, did not take the step of actually turning around and doing it themselves. And so, similarly, we saw people a little confused last year. Maybe you were getting $1,000 refund and instead you ended up getting $100, but what you were getting was more money in your, let's say, biweekly paycheck, right? And most people now receive direct deposit, so your paycheck fluctuates slightly every pay period, right? If you're getting like 3 payments in 1 month, they might not be taking certain withholdings out, so it goes up or down like $20 or $30. And so they didn't really realize what was happening to them, right? And that was just an education that people didn't know. We're about to report earnings, so I can't comment on flows and what we're seeing kind of for this year. I think we'll be curious to see if people made adjustments once they had that opportunity. I think that where the tax preparation world is evolving very, very fast is we are moving into virtual. So if you think of it right now you kind of have 2 different channels people see it as. You could come into an office, right, and sit and have somebody do your return or drop it off, or you can do it yourself with software. What's happening is they're blending the two, where kind of like you may never go in a bank now and actually physically deposit checks. You snap them on your phones. You communicate kind of with a pop-up. In the tax world now, you may start it, at home or do something, and you have a question, right? You may have even done it, but you're like, maybe someone should double check this. But you don't want to physically go down to a store. It may be closed, maybe 11 at night, and you're doing it at your kitchen table. So you may want to email it to somebody, but you want it in a secure portal. You may, let's say you're doing it in the afternoon, and you actually have a question. You don't want to email it on Sunday afternoon and hear back on Monday afternoon. You want to do it now. So you literally can now go in and get a pop-up, and it's an actual human being. Somebody who's going to talk to you, and you say, I'm on this section, here it is. Did I calculate this right? Yup, great. And then you want to hang up. You want to finish it and go do what you're doing. And so this kind of omnipresent channel where you don't have to go into an office, you can get virtual help. Well, who does this help? Low-income people who may be a single mom who has 3 kids who can't on a Sunday, they're doing it with the kid tugging on their leg and they got to take somebody to soccer, but they've got 10 minutes for a question. Conversely, if you're in rural America, we often talk about urban America and the challenges of low-income people there, but if you're in rural America and you don't have access to a preparer, it's not as easy. It's a long drive. It's snowing in the middle of the winter. You now can get plugged into a network. It's similar to you're seeing with kind of health technology and how you can access people. So our world is, people don't think about this. They think of it as a pretty basic pen and paper, software spreadsheet world, is now turning into a virtual world where you are served, on your smartphone or on your tablet. And so I think we're seeing this acceleration in our industry.
Great. So now the fun part, we get to talk a little bit more about, and turn to Aparna and to Chai-Ching to talk about, we've already alluded a lot to this. Congressman Davis talked about the Economic Mobility Act. There's also Brown-Bennett, Durbin-Wyden in the Senate. And also, we cannot forget about the state policy as well when it comes to the EITC in particular and kind of the activity that we've seen at that level. But how do we improve the credits, improve access, improve tax administration, obviously getting more people eligible for it, bolster these credits, obviously streamline them and think about the security sides and the overpayment issue as well. What are some of the ideas that are out there now? There was hope for some expansion last year, obviously at the federal level with the tax extenders discussion, and the ITC and CTC unfortunately did not go anywhere in that. But are there any opportunities, or what are the most promising opportunities for the next year?
Yeah. Can I pick up on something that Mary sort of noted? That there was a lot of discussion around the 2017 tax law. It spent $1.9 trillion. There was a lot of promises and expectation that would do a lot for ordinary people. And it didn't, largely, for the population that we're talking about, low and moderate income working families who are eligible for the credits or who aren't eligible because their incomes are too low or because the rules don't allow them to take eligibility. So those are two sort of really massive pieces of unfinished business, and really one of the top policy priorities, I think, going forward for the credits is addressing those left behind people. One big group that we've heard about is that 5 million workers taxed into or deeper into poverty by the federal tax code, largely because the EITC for workers without dependent children is either non-existent or very small. Yeah, and that's it's a large clunky phrase. You often hear childless workers, but many of them are actually non-custodial parents. They may actually be helping to care for children in the broader family. Some of them are older workers with grown children that are no longer in the home. So that's a really important group where Representative Davis has really been sort of pushing to try to do something more there. And then we've got children in the very poorest families who are locked out of receiving any child tax credit or the maximum credit because of the way that it phases in with earnings, and because of the way that the 2017 tax law actually created a new artificial cap on the amount that can be received as a refund. So to me, those are really important areas for federal policymakers to focus on. And as David mentioned, there are lots of different bills that would do one or the other, or both in the case of the Working Families Tax Relief Act, together with extending the federal EITC to Puerto Rico, which is another sort of really important aspect of that. We should acknowledge that we're not expecting major tax legislation to be moving in the next year or so, but there is sort of pressure for technical corrections to the 2017 tax law. So there may be vehicles that do move, and my strong suggestion is that lawmakers who are looking to sort of tidy up some of the technical issues from the 2017 tax law should use that opportunity to address one of the biggest things that was left out of that tax law, which is making a down payment for some of these workers and families who are basically left behind. So we could make progress towards those bigger goals by doing something in a package like that.
Great. Yeah, I do agree with Chai Cheng. I think it was surprising that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act did nothing on the EITC, given sort of, we've always sort of talked about it as a bipartisan proposal or a program that has bipartisan support. And so, frankly, even to me, it was, why not the EITC? We did see an expansion of the child tax credit. So I think when you sort of start saying, well, how were families helped? I think the CTC did a little bit of that. But clearly, not much in terms of direct targeted support towards the lowest wage workers. In terms of ideas, I think there's a sort of broad consensus on where the EITC and the CTC are not delivering enough. As we said, there's complexity in the program, which often leaves out a lot of taxpayers who should be, claiming the credit but are not doing so. So if we are actually trying to help low-income families through the tax code, simplifying the system would be a step in that direction. Expanding the credit for childless workers or non-custodial parents, I think, has again been on every platform, and a lot of people have talked about it. Hopefully that does happen sometime soon. It is interesting that there are now newer calls for expanding the EITC for caregivers. And I don't know if you are familiar with the cost of living refund proposal that just came out of the Economic Security Project. And I do see some candidates sort of starting to talk about that, is how do we expand the EITC for people who are not technically working, but they're working in the home. They're the full-time caregivers. How do we support those people who have voluntarily dropped out of the workforce because they have caregiving needs at home? And that's something I care about. I work a lot on paid family leave, and I do think that, figuring out, well, how do we support parents and caregivers when they need to take that time off? How do we ensure that there's a system of payment that still continues? I think that there's much more likely to be support for expanding the child tax credit than there is to do the EITC. And for the reason I just talked about, which is we're already seeing Republicans sort of talking about expanding the child tax credit for paid leave and for allowing new parents to claim an advanced CTC to some extent, but then in an expanded form. And that is also an idea that I think the Democrats have supported traditionally. Expanding the CTC helps families with children. So I think that there's much more likely to be momentum on that particular program than there is on the EITC, which for some reason has been left out. Thank you.
And of course, as you mentioned, David, I mean, the states, things may move in the states, and I think a lot of states are looking to boost their state EITCs or CTCs, particularly given that state tax codes overall are regressive. So it's a really important way to help sort of offset some of those other state taxes, particularly sales taxes and other things that hit low-income families harder.
Well, and it's also true that a lot of states tie their code to the federal code, and when the federal code changed, they then by law have to start making changes. And so once you open up your code, where it goes is an interesting question, and a lot of states are doing that now.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, no, it's, I mean, especially as you said, Chai-Ching, in a year where we don't expect a ton of federal movement, obviously, it is promising that, we see the state expansions, but not only in kind of traditionally blue, thinking about it as a partisan issue, really red, very red states like Arkansas and Georgia are moving, their own EITC bills. And in addition to a plethora of other states are kind of pushing it, the red, purple, and blue, trying to think about ways to expand it in this year and the future. So that's very promising. The caregiver aspect is a controversial, but another interesting aspect as well to think about. The only other connection I would make, another big thing that was mentioned earlier in Gary's remarks, the idea, both we've seen, the idea of making periodic payments. The advance. Either it's CTC, EITC discussions around different aspects of these credits. That's one way to think about smoothing it out over the year. Obviously, you see from families typically a huge preference for the lump sum. I'm sure Dan and Mary can speak to this from being on the ground. The alternative is the idea of the Refund Rainy Day Savings Act, which kind of allows you to seize the lump sum, but then defer for 6 months a portion of it, so you can kind of smooth that out. Because as we know from the data, families are struggling. You can watch kind of household financial stability reach this point where they're like in deprivation right before they receive the refund. Why they're coming into the tax site really angry because they need this money. They've been waiting for it and anticipating it. In some cases, already spent it many times and need to pay back bills. But then when you get 6 months out, which is halfway out, then you're back kind of in the same position where you're struggling. So it's an interesting aspect. I do want to make sure we also talk about the VITA program, which came up a lot today, the expansion. Where do we go next with VITA? How do we improve it? It's been tremendous progress making the program permanent, expanding funding. The other aspect around the tax preparation side is thinking about the free file program too. And, a lot of controversy around that and the program and its expansion improvements. And I know, Dan, you probably have thoughts about that from H&R Block's perspective, but would love to hear folks' thoughts on either of those programs when it comes to what's next for VITA and the Free File program, which are both important aspects for low-income families.
So for VITA, we do a ton of recruiting from all of our colleges, universities, our professional partners, just to get the volunteers in. And this year, actually, we've opened 6 facilitated self-assist offices, and those are through partnerships. And we hold workshops to train people how to do their own taxes. We push out to all of our volunteers free file. You're as a VITA volunteer, that it's a perk that you can do your taxes, you can help your families with their taxes, but we're trying to push them to go to free fall and do it that way, where that when they're spending time in the tax site at the end of the night, we're still doing quality reviews and, you're not taking that kind of time, right? So it is so important to marry the VITA, the facilitated self-assist, and the virtual. And if we can marry those 3 things, that doesn't sound right, does it? 3? But anyway, if we can pull all of those things together, right, and have all of that under an umbrella, then I think we're helping to educate, which is so important, right, to get people to learn about their own financial history, their own what's going on in their financial life. So we are really pushing to start with the facilitated self-assist, and then those that are comfortable doing the free file. And for organizations such as ours, a lot of VITA organizations are a little reluctant because when you do free file or the facilitated self-assist, you're not being able to pull down the data that's needed to give to your funders, because your funders, that's what drives, can you give us this? We'll give you that. Can you? And quite honestly, that's what it's like. And as great as this $25 million increase, we're hoping that it will trickle down more to the VITA sites and the sites that are doing this work. We spend right now about $60,000 just in advertisement, because we're trying to get people to file their taxes. We do tons of mailings. We send out about 50,000 postcards every year. And then that's twice a year, one to get ready and one saying these are all the sites that you can go. We spend a lot of money in training, because for VITA, every volunteer, anybody that works in VITA, must be IRS certified. And to Dan's point, that is something that I hope that anybody that's preparing taxes would eventually become certified. It should be a mandatory that they're certified, because that's what's going to help with fraud. That's what's going to help with applying the tax law correctly. That's what helps us when it comes to filing accurate returns, because we drill it in and then you take your test, right? So VITA itself, volunteers aren't what they used to be. You used to have a dedicated volunteer that would come and stay almost the whole tax season with you. The face of volunteerism has changed. And, each year you're working and struggling to get as many and more volunteers. But then you have to be creative and find another way to get the service to the folks. And, again, I'm hoping that with the dollars that are coming through IRS, that we can put more in marketing, more, because it's about education. Education, they're the two pillars for us. One is the free tax prep work that we do, whether it's facilitated self-assist or virtual, and then the second is the education of the taxpayer, to let them know what they're eligible for. Come into our sites and we can help them. Now, I'd like to ask Dan a favor. Could we borrow John Hand from you? Yeah. Because marketing and advertisement is what drives. And if you could just lend him to us, just for VITA for one. Anyway, thank you.
You can come here next year.
That's right. Free file. This is an issue that has been in the news. And we have been proud to participate in Free File since its founding 18 years ago. I think there's been a lot of commentary about the program recently, and I think I want to just kind of proactively address kind of a couple things. The underpinning of the program is that the member companies donate their software for free, and the IRS markets the program. Now, as most people in this room know, the IRS's budget, not just marketing a free file, but pretty much across the board, has been slashed. This goes back primarily to the allegations of a targeting scandal, now 16 years ago. And since that time, there has been a pretty steady march downward. I think there was actually a recent increase to help implement the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. A public-private partnership, part of that is the private companies have a right to operate their commercial businesses. The IRS recently announced some changes to the contract that underpins the Free File program. And one of the things that they stated very explicitly is we have a right to run our commercial businesses parallel to Free File. We have a right to compete for those clients. The clients can make their choices. When Free File was designed, the point of it was that you would go through the IRS website, through irs.gov, to access the program. Why is that the case? All the offerings in Free File are different. Everyone has a different offering. It's based on income and based on age criteria. The theory is if you go there, you'll find the right one for you. right? When the allegations that have come out about companies engaging in certain behavior, as all of the independent reports that have come out, and there was a Treasury Inspector General one yesterday, said, we were not doing anything that violated the program. They did not want people going directly to companies' landing pages. And the reason for that is if you go to our landing page directly without going through irs.gov and you determine that you're not eligible for our offering, you now have to hope that the consumer jumps out of that and goes and starts searching for the other ones, as opposed to going through a front door that has all the offerings present at the same time. When IRS asked if the companies would be willing to change this, to allow the company landing pages to appear in organic search, we all said fine. So that change has been made. Another issue that's been out there is this idea that the IRS cannot compete. One of the things that we were taken aback with, the IRS General Counsel was taken aback with, and several people on the Finance Committee, is that the document that governs Free File has always said either party could exit this agreement with 12 months written notice. And so when people said the IRS can't enter the market, we said they can terminate this agreement at any time and enter the marketplace. So when IRS said, are you okay if we explicitly make this statement clear? The industry said, absolutely. It's a public policy question of whether the government should enter the marketplace, and we leave that to policymakers. And so, we are proud to donate our software. 50 million people have accessed it. And, the IRS and their ability to market the program, we submitted a letter last year calling for increased IRS funding for a host of things, right? For us, we deal with them. We want our calls returned. We want our calls answered when we're calling on behalf of clients. We want clients to be able to access IRS services. And so, the fact that the program has not been marketed, this will be up for policymakers to decide, but we have been really proud to be a part of it and are proud that it's helped, over 50 million people.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
And before we wrap in the next 5 minutes, just one final round to ask our panelists. Any other thoughts on future directions? We heard about VITA and Free File, but any of these other pieces. One thing I'd particularly note that we didn't get to touch on was on the research aspect. Aparna, you touched on a growing body of literature around the research impacts of, these refundable tax credits like the EITC. One thing in particular, H&R Block and Prosperity Now are also engaging, speaking of research, a big research project, looking at financial services products usage at tax time and how that impacts families. And we're going to be launching this qualitative study out in the field after this tax filing season. So we're pretty excited about that. And we'll have more results from that to kind of share about how families are impacted during tax time. But if there's any other research pieces that people want to note or future directions, it is also an election year, so that's one thing that can be potentially touched on as well. I'd love to give our panelists kind of a final say before we wrap up. Yeah.
Yeah, just in closing, I think the areas of research where I see research on the EITC expanding is just how to make people aware that they're eligible for the credit. So it's not even the people who have already walked into the door and are trying to figure out, how complicated is this? What do I claim? It's amazing that there are so many people across different states who just don't even know that they're eligible for something like the EITC. And so we're seeing a ton of interesting research, sort of figuring out what kind of nudges really work on people and how do we get them to claim something, as Commissioner Reddick said, free cash lying around the halls that people are not claiming. So I think that's a potential area of, going forward. But just, in ending, sort of, want to show support for these tax credit programs and the fact that they're really doing a lot for low-income families. It's a means of using the tax code to directly address the lives of a lot of low-income households, and I think we could be doing much better at that. Thank you.
Yeah, so again, being Switzerland, we're not going to say if things are good or bad policy, but just that we do obviously see the impact it has, which is pretty material to people's lives. And just to echo what David said, I think we're very excited for this research project with Prosperity Now because we're really curious about why people make the choices they do. What, in the real world, what are the products and services that they have access to? Why do they make those decisions? If they can't turn to X, where would they go? What is their why? I think that there's been kind of a growing sense within the progressive community that while supply of certain products and services disappeared, the demand has not, and people are going into kind of various corners. And so I think we're really excited to just do this research, see how tax time impacts that, again, being the largest financial transaction of the year, and just see why people do some of the things that they do, and understand that would be very exciting.
I just underscore that a lot of the great ideas that we've heard about that would really help improve tax time, both for VITA sites and for filers generally, require the IRS to do things. Expanding their language offerings, paid preparer regulation, ensuring that people have basic standards of competency. I mean, that actually requires the IRS to enforce that. The rainy day fund, which I think is a really attractive and thoughtful idea that allows filers to have the choice between lump sums and more regular amounts without creating risk. That is also something that requires the IRS. Taking full advantage of new agreements in free file, doing some of the research that relies on IRS data to find out how we can encourage people to take the credits that they have earned. All of that requires IRS staff. All of that requires IRS funding. The IRS has lost over 20% of its funding since 2010. Some staff in some areas are down by 30%. Regional staff in particular, who are really important for VITA sites on the ground, they've been hurt really hard. So I will say the thing that perhaps the Commissioner was too polite to say, which is that we really need to work on getting policymakers to restore IRS funding for service, for enforcement, which includes answering the phones to low-income filers who may have been asked to provide more paperwork around their credits. So I think all of that's really important. And then just finally, I would like to say a thank you to the VITA sites and to the IRS and to the volunteers, the VITA volunteers. I know there are a number of you in the audience who are sort of stuck between this fact of really changing people's lives and then all of the challenges that we are talking about today that we have to sort of work on ameliorating. You're in the eye of the storm, and particularly so as filing season is bearing down on us. So thank you so much for your work.
So I'd like to end with, we all learn different ways, right? So some people can read a book and they get it. Some people are hands-on and they get it, right? So it really depends on marketing. I think marketing is so important and sending the right message, but it has to be in Philadelphia with the revenue, and I've said it to them so they wouldn't be surprised. They send out and they spend tons of money in marketing, but it's an incomplete message. You have to have the message complete. Someone needs to know I'm eligible, and where do you go, and how do I get this? And if the sentence is as simple as going to file your return, then say that. Tell them not just they're eligible for this credit, but what are the steps to acquiring these credits. So, for us, we have added so many things in our tax site to encourage people to come in. We can now screen you for 21 public benefits in the state of Pennsylvania, right? We have credit counselors. We have nutrition people come in. Anything that adds more value to our clients' lives. Someone's taking 2 hours. Sometimes it's even a little longer, depending on how many volunteers you have. So what value can we add to their lives when they come into the tax site? So we continue to look for those kind of partners that can add value to that client. And if someone in one of our marketing pieces, if it says, come, we do your taxes, however, we still screen you, or you need credit counseling, one of those things might drive them. We let them know that we can help you clean up your past taxes for 3 years. People need to know these things, but the message is that whoever is delivering it, it has to be a complete message. This is what we're here to help you with. This is how you acquire it. And this group of people are here, they're knowledgeable, they're trusted, and when they finish, you're going to have that accurate return. You're going to have those dollars. And if you don't have an account, we're going to help you get that too. So this is our mindset and how we can help push the message along and push this valuable credit along to people.
And that's a very fitting closing. Please join me in thanking not only our panelists, but our speakers earlier, tax credits for workers and their families, and obviously the Prosperity Now staff who helped organize this today. Thank you, everybody.